Hey, it's Dr. Karin. Were you raised with this nightmarish idea of this eternal burning hell? So I'm here to debunk this myth of a fiery hell and an eternal condemnation so that you can more fully embrace your spiritual destiny. Let's dive in. So first of all, as I dive into this idea of is there a hell or isn't there a hell, I want to respect the fact that you are your own spiritual being here having your own spiritual awakening experience. And I want you to use your own discernment. How does your soul feel as I'm telling you this information? I want you to find your pathway to finding your own spiritual truths as I share mine. So I'm just going to jump right in. Do I believe there is really a hell? Not the one that the church taught us. I believe that hell is more of a state of mind, but let me further explain this. So two of the things that really blew the lid off of this teaching that I was taught in the church, I was raised Church of God, I was born Lutheran, and then grew up Church of God. There was a lot of teaching about Revelation, fire and brimstone. I was raised in the South, so I heard a lot of really scary stuff. I was raised petrified that I was going to be burning in hell forever if maybe I had lied the moment before Jesus came and I was cast into the fiery pit. So there are two things that gave me a big aha moment that helped me to change my belief system into believing that there really is not a physical place called hell. And the first one is that, first of all, we call God our Heavenly Father, right? So you that are parents, or you that have always wanted parents, or maybe you just love a child in this world and you have this great maternal or paternal energy. If that child messed up, would you ever say to that child, sorry, this is the day I just came home and oh, you just spilled the cookie jar. You're going in the fiery pit. See you never again. No. No parent would ever cast their child into an eternal destiny of burning in a hell. Because why? Because they love them and they want what's best for them and they want them to continue to grow and try again. And this very simple analogy was the big aha moment where I started to rethink, if God is supposed to be our Heavenly Father, I believe God is a source of energy now, but let's just say a creator, a creative source of energy. It's actually a source of love. If source, which is what I call God now, is just full of unconditional love, would unconditional love ever cast its child into a fiery pit? No. And the second aha moment that I had was when I started to realize on my spiritual awakening path that source and God is not something separate from us. It's not some big old man in the sky that we need to get on our knees and say specific prayers to in the hopes that he isn't busy in that moment and maybe is going to pay attention to us. No, source is part of us. We are all part of source. When you were born into this world as a spiritual being, you actually brought part of the divine through you. That's part of Christ's consciousness, part of universal wisdom. You have the sacred piece of source love inside of you. So if we're looking at this old paradigm, which is what I consider it, that there is a hell, that some of us are going to go to a heaven and some of us are going to go to a hell based on your behavior on this planet, that means that if you believe that source God is within you, then source is actually throwing itself into an eternal pit of fire. There's no way that could be true because that would be unto itself eternally putting itself into damnation. That makes zero sense to me. So alternatively, what I believe is that specifically when Jesus was teaching in the Bible, and I'm going to give you a few really specific pointers about the words that were really used for the word that was later translated into HE double hockey sticks in our language. But as we're looking at this idea, the real meaning of it as it was taught through biblical text, through any other texts that have come through in the religious platforms, was that hell is actually a state of mind, right? Hell is actually on earth a state of consciousness where you are actually pinching yourself off or cutting yourself off, disconnecting yourself from source, from love. And when you're living a life where you've cut yourself off from self-love, from acceptance, the highest vibrational states of consciousness are enlightenment and peace and joy and love. You're vibrating up at a very, very high frequency when you are in those states of consciousness. The lowest states of consciousness are shame and guilt and fear, and you've actually felt a contraction in your soul when you're living in those states of being. So if you have followed this old paradigm of judgment, of fear, of separation, there is a disconnection that you're experiencing from source. That is what living in a hell on earth feels like. And many of you have probably been through that. I've been through it in periods of my life when I've maybe gone through depression or gone through times when I've just wanted to give it all up and you feel like nothing is ever going to feel right again or you're never going to be happy again. And you feel that, just that dark night of the soul, you feel hopeless, you feel despair. Again, that's at a very, very low state of consciousness. And that is what Jesus was implying when he taught about hell, about those that are choosing, right? So in each moment, we have a choice about what direction we go next. Even when we fall into these moments of despair or depression, we have a choice of helping ourselves, of picking a better feeling thought, of changing our vibration, of changing our frequency, of rising up the vibrational scale of consciousness towards Christ consciousness, which is up here around the state of consciousness of love, of peace, and of joy. So as you're going along your spiritual awakening journey, that is what we're going to continue to talk about. And I do this in other videos, how to really expand your consciousness, how to continue to go up to this place that feels like heaven on earth, that doesn't feel like this hellish feeling of constantly judging ourselves, of constantly shaming ourselves. Because shame, when we're in that state of consciousness, we literally cannot function as human beings. You're contracted so low. It's actually a 20 on the vibrational scale of consciousness. Peace, joy, and love, we're talking 300, 400, 500. When Jesus was here, he existed up around a 2000, like the ultimate state of bliss. So when you're living that disconnected in that place of shame and regret, you have totally disconnected yourself from the source inside of you. And that is what Jesus meant by hell on earth. So I'm going to give you 3 specific words that were used in the original Aramaic text that referenced later to be translated into the word hell. But before I give you those 3 specific words, if you like this kind of material and love this talk on spiritual awakening, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to my channel, because there's going to be more coming down the pipe as time goes on. Let's get back to the video. Now again, the Bible was written initially in Aramaic. That's the language that Jesus spoke, okay? So we're going from original Aramaic text when we're talking about the words of Jesus, and we're being translated into Greek later, which was being translated through a culture, a philosophy of the Greek culture at the time. And then we go into translating into all the different versions in the English language, which is what we're speaking here today. The saying lost in translation is very specific to this kind of evolution of a text, because the words do get lost in translation because there very often is not a very specific, succinct, translatable word that matches the word that was in the original Aramaic. So the ones that are translating at the time, again, with the philosophy and the culture of wherever they're living, going through their own thought patterns and their own sense of being, they're translating it to their best of their ability, and then some of that original meaning gets lost. So I want to talk to you about the 3 words that were used in the Bible that later were translated into the word hell, but originally it did not mean hell at all. So the first word that was used in the Bible was actually used in the Old Testament, and that's the word Sheol. And it actually means grave or pit or anywhere where a dead body is placed, which, by the way, every one of us at some point, depending on what your choice of burial, is going to be put in some kind of pit. So the word Sheol in the Old Testament was used very often as a metaphor representing the opposite of what it feels like to have a life connected to the divine. The second word that was used in the Bible quite often was the word Hades. Now that's much more familiar in our English language, but the word Hades is actually the Greek translation of the word Sheol, which again just means grave or pit. It does not mean an eternal resting place of fire. It was used to describe the opposite of what it feels like to be connected to God. It was not meant to be an eternal resting place where you will forever be condemned into Hades. It's actually just a grave or a pit. The third word that was used in the New Testament quite often was the word Gehenna. Now, Gehenna was a place that sat right outside of Jerusalem that was actually the Valley of Hinnom, which was a place where they would put trash that they would burn, and they would also dump dead bodies like during wartime. And so it was this really dark, scary place and pretty horrific of like burning, and it felt like it would burn forever. What Jesus meant was, as a metaphor, that you were living a life where you felt kind of in this state of decay, the state of bondage, the state of despair. So again, Jesus referred to Gehenna quite often, but later biblical scholars translated the word Gehenna into the word hell because it seemed more appropriate at the time when they were writing the newer versions of the Bible. But really, it just meant the fiery pit where they were throwing all the stuff that was not the place you wanted to be. Again, we want to stay connected to source. We don't want to live in a place that feels like Gehenna. We want to live in a place where we feel connected, where we can feel this heaven on earth, which I believe is a state of mind as we're here in this human experience. So as you're going along your path of spiritual awakening, I hope that you can more fully embrace this idea that you can have this heaven on earth, and that at one point you will go back into non-physical, you will go into a spiritual form, and then you'll know everything and have this great, wonderful experience of bliss. But while you're here in this human experience, as Jesus taught, when we disconnect ourselves from source, love, unconditional acceptance within us, we've placed ourselves in a state of mind that can feel like hell, and that's nowhere that you want to be. So if this type of teaching resonates with you and you really like to hear this leading edge, new exploration of spirituality in contradiction to maybe old time religion, I've got a free masterclass coming up for you that's going to show you how to activate this rebel soul inside of you. So click the link below and sign up. I can't wait to see you there.